Well, we're trying to get it all together here, and we'll see. 1, 2. Okay, here's what we had at once. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2.
It would help to turn the switch, someone said. We try. Live and learn, and we've lived a long time. I want to thank all you folks for coming in. I think you're going to have a really good program today. In fact, we've had this year some excellent, the first program, the speakers are sitting right over here, and they told us about the Oakwood Cemetery. So that was extremely good. Today we have Diane Slyke from Madison, living in Boutville, but part of the Madison Historical Society, and she's here to tell us about the Chenango Canal. We do have some, let me mention briefly some other things coming up. And I think in March we have our Saturday meeting, and the speaker is Mary Messier, or Backstreet Mary. And we've tried to get her a number of times, and there have been some problems, and we couldn't get her. And this time I think it's going to work out. You know what they say, the definition of life is what happens while you're making other plans. I think that's what happened. At any rate, she's going to be here in March, first Saturday, 1 o'clock, and is going to talk about something of great interest, I think, to really all of us in historical business, and that is how to use digital things, equipment and programs, and what's the best thing that you can do to keep our records so other generations can find them and read them and use them and so forth. So that's going to be coming up. Coming up in April, some time ago we had a little discussion, and Charlie Shea began telling us about some of the doctors who used to serve this area, and names many of us never heard of. And so we are having a program. Bill and Joanne Casey are going to talk about medical care in Fabius, the history of it, talk about some of these doctors, and some of you folks sitting here, at least one of them I know about was born right here in Fabius, here in the village. Well, that's coming up in April, and that's the last of our Saturday meetings. And then for May, we go back to our evening schedule. First Monday, 7 p.m. First Monday, 7 p.m. And we have Linda Myers. Not here? Okay. Linda and her friends had a program on women on the farm, wives on the farm, what it's like. And it was so well received that we're going to have Linda come back, and with more women talking about women's life on the farm in this area. So don't miss that. That's coming up in May. In June, thanks to Sandy's very good work, we have William Smullen. Do you want to say anything about him, or should I just...
Just go ahead.
go ahead with what I've got here. Okay. He is going to be here. He's now on the faculty at Syracuse University. He is at present director of the National Security Studies at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. He has this. Prior to this, he was Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. So instead of just talking about now this town, this village, this area, we are now opening up to the world. Secretary of Chief of Staff to Colin Powell. And he'll be joining us for a discussion, but he has not yet disclosed his topic. Has he disclosed himself yet? He's not. Okay. That's coming up. That's only half of the year, folks, so stay tuned, come back. We got a lot of good things. I will leave these papers over on the table over there if you want to look at them for yourself. And also, our treasurer and his wife have gone to Florida with our checkbook. Now, we trust him, but we would like, folks, we would like to give Diane here a little, some money, a little for expenses and gasoline and so forth. And so if you will, as you move around, there's a little receptacle on the table. If you could deposit something, it would be helpful, I think. Please do that. Okay. All right. Today we have Diane Van Slyke is here with her husband Fran from, they are both part of the Madison Historical Society. Fran has had the good luck to be elected president. Didn't you leave or run away in time? Or?
Well, what it is, they asked for somebody to step forward and everybody else, I stood there and everybody was stepped back. You know?
I see. Okay, well, you got to learn those things. You were never in the Army, right? Okay. At any rate, and Diane is also the president of the Chenango Canal Association. Did I get that right? She's secretary of the Madison County Historical Society, and she is also Madison Town historian. Now, she's going to talk to us about the Chenango Canal. I know you talk about canal, everybody's thinking Erie Canal, that's what we think about. But sometime in the early 19th century, some people got the brilliant idea, good idea, that it would be helpful to hook up the coal fields in Pennsylvania with the Erie Canal. And back then, and people could then get coal and other things. And so the Shenango Canal was thought of. And as I think Diane's going to tell you, I read your article here in this little magazine, it was hard. It was a very difficult project to go from, where did they start that?
They started at the summit in Baltimore, and they went down.
Oh, they went down.
Everything went down for
Oh, so then you went down to Utica, and you went down to where?
Binghamton.
To Binghamton. So if you go from Binghamton to Bowville, the high point is like 700 feet. It's not good to have, ships going up their way unless you have got enough water for them. And then down to Utica, and that's down 300 feet. Took a whole lot of building, a whole lot of engineering and design. She'll tell you all about it. Diane, welcome to the Fabius Historical Society.
I'd like to thank you for having me and for turning out for this, and Chuck and Irene for inviting my husband and I, and I really appreciate being here, and thank you, Sandy, wherever you went to. There you are. I appreciate this. And my husband, Fran, is the person that I have by my side for some of these, and I wouldn't have had a lot to do with the Shenango Canal if it hadn't been for him. So he really provides a lot of insight and a backbone and fixes things when they go wrong, and I can explain a little bit further if we're still within my timeline. I don't want to keep you too late, so we'll start here. My slide, and this is the first time I'm showing this. I put it together yesterday. I've done a lot of research for it, so bear with me. Okay. Long time ago, there was just forest in all this area, and it was very hilly and swampy and quicksand and all kinds of things, and the Indians knew, the Native Americans knew where the best routes were. They had all these trails, and that's what the pioneers used when they came out here. The colonists were settling this land, and it was very, very uninhabited. So they started building log cabins, but they were very low. In fact, the tar paper roof, or the bark roof rather, went all the way down to, sloped down to the back, and it was 2 feet above the ground at that point. So it was very, very primitive. So when they wanted to transport goods, they had to go from stream to stream because the roads were, the trails were so bad. They started to make roads. The roads were not passable the whole time of year. And they had to transport goods from stream to stream on sleds. So it was very, very difficult. So because of that, also the Allegheny Mountains in every single eastern state had made it impassable for anybody to move west except in New York. So right along where the Mohawk River was, there was a passageway where they could go west. And west meant Buffalo. So they haven't expanded very much in the western part of New York. George Washington actually wanted to look at New York State. He left Newburgh, where his quarters were, Newburgh, New York, and traveled upstate. And he was quoted as struck by what Providence has provided us with the significance of the waterways. A new water travel was the most reliable. Indians would pole people along the Chenango River on a raft or in a little boat to be able to get to where they wanted to go in those times. The first official mention of canals, December 16th, right on your birthday, 1768, Governor Moore made the first official mention in front of the General Assembly. And they resolved, it passed the House on December 31st, but what did he do? On January 2nd, he exercised his prerogative by dissolving the Assembly, which of course left the proposal mute. So everything really did start with the Erie Canal, and I have to backtrack to that for several slides. It was a gateway to the west waterway. It was proposed by Governor DeWitt Clinton. A committee was formed to study the proposal. The New York State legislature recommended the building of the canal for $5 million. The War of 1812 held it up, so they had to put it on hold for a little while, but they went back to it in 1817, and they started construction right in the middle in Rome. And they did that because Rome was between Rome and Utica was the flattest section. It was the easiest part to do it, and they knew, the Irish knew, that they had to get somewhere with it. They had to go all the way to the end. They couldn't start at one end and just go in a little ways. They needed to start in the middle and go. And politically, it looked good for Governor Clinton. So they began, and a man named Candace White took it upon himself, self-paid, to go out to England and Ireland and traverse the canals there. Now, they were only made in the latter part of the 1800s as well, but they were built a little bit differently, and he found out by walking as a hoggy for 1,000 miles. Now, a hoggy is a driver of the mules or the horses on the towpath, and we think, hoggy is a local term, we're not sure, but we think it was probably named after the large sandwiches that they ate when they were on the road. Now, it may not have been like sandwiches we think of today. It may have been a mustard sandwich, but they call them hoggies. So to this day, that's what we call them. They made inventions using a tree stump puller. There's a picture of one in the book that you just showed me, and it's immense, and it was like 2 huge wheels, and it had an axle, and it had a small wheel in the middle with a chain wrapped around it, and they would put it around the tree stump, and they would have an oxen attached to that middle. The outer wheels were stationary, the middle one turned. The oxen would pull on the chain, and it would uproot that big tree stump. And it was an invention they made on the Erie. Dumping barrels, narrow space, local hydraulic cement. Andrew Bartow listened to a farmer named Sullivan up on the Erie Canal area who found that his land was very acidic, and he wanted to sweeten it up, and they usually use limestone. So he took what he thought was limestone from the local cliffs and he spread it on his field, but he found that his field was wet, and it hardened this so-called limestone. It did no good at all. And it turned out that it was called meager limestone, which means that it's crumbly, meager, or it was called Roman limestone. And when it gets wet, it got hard. So Andrew Bartow recognized this, and he put it in pails of water, and he experimented with it. And then they took it to a blacksmith shop, and they pounded it, and when it got hard, and they burned it in the forge to a powder, and they found that they could make cement that would hold underwater. It was hydraulic cement that was locally found. It was so much cheaper to buy it here than it was to ship it in from England. So that helped the Erie Canal, and it helped the Shenango Canal be built. So you see why I'm starting with the Erie. So all this experience that came from the Erie, all the mistakes that happened on the Erie came. They tried to build the locks, the great big chambers that boats went through out of wood on the Erie, and they deteriorated so bad. I mean, wood does swell with water, and it becomes cement hard underneath. But the different weather that we have here, the climates, the freezing and everything, they knew they had to go to masonry, so they went to stone. October 26th, the Erie Canal officially opened, and it connected Buffalo to Troy, and then ships could go down the Hudson River to New York City, and New York City became known as the greatest port on the eastern seaboard. It was previously competing with Philadelphia and with some places in Massachusetts. So now New York State became known as the Empire State, first time that was coined. So now we have the Irish to build the Erie. Now, the Irish had to migrate to America or to other countries because of the potato famine in 1818. They were hungry and they were determined. They had nothing but the clothes on their back and the experience that they had working in Ireland, and they made a lot of canals. They were employed at that time, but when Depression hit because of the potato famine and all that, they came to America. So they had nothing to lose, and they worked together. They were tree pullers and axemen and strippers and sawyers and carpenters and stonecutters and masons and surveyors. And there was hammers and chisels and plows and scrapers and pullers, and you can see the list there. Block and tackle, surveying tools. They knew how to deal with mules and oxen and draft horses, and they found the stone in quarries and cliffs. They made quarries. Quarries developed in our area, this area, because of the Shenango Canal. Well, in 1814, the very first proposition was given to the legislature to say, they added with pleasure that it will not be difficult to extend this communication to the fertile vales watered by the Susquehanna and its wide-spreading branches. And at that time, two routes were considered. Either the route that was chosen, the valley of Oriskany Creek down the Chenango and Susquehanna rivers to Pennsylvania, or up the Seneca River and Seneca Lake to the valley south to the Chemung River and then to the Susquehanna River. And this is a map of what we actually have. It was taken from the Shenango Canal, the book of the Shenango Canal by Barry Meyer. You can see Utica at the top, Binghamton at the bottom. Now the key proponent, one key proponent, a man that was, he gave his life for the canal, was Reuben Tower. And he pushed the legislature until his death. He made repeated trips back to Albany. He introduced himself and his canal project to 150 legislatures out of the 159. And he suffered a stagecoach accident in 1831. He never recovered from it, and he died in 1832, never seeing the Shenango Canal built. Now, the reason the proposition was defeated was because of uncertainty of sufficient water supply. Tolls may not equal the maintenance cost and interest on the original investment, and the arbitrary cost that they set of $1 million, they thought maybe it would go over that. They were not pleased. They said no. This is a picture of how high it had to go to the summit. Now, Binghamton's on the right-hand side, and you can see all the different levels that were leveled up. Those are all different locks in those areas. There was 114 locks, and then two large locks on either side of the Susquehanna River and on the Erie Canal. And then it goes all the way up to Boutville, and that plateau is approximately 5 miles long. And then down. That plateau is owned by the state of New York even today. The whole thing was a state of New York project. But they retain the water rights. They still own that summit because they would like to be able to use it for water if they need it in a drought. They still do. It still does feed into the Barge Canal, the old Barge Canal, which is the old Erie Canal today. You can see the drop-off to Salzville and the Oriskany Falls, and it kind of cuts off there. But the steep descent from Boutville, they had over 76 locks there. It was really amazing how they had to do it. A lock took about 4 minutes to go through, so you can imagine how slow it was at 4 miles an hour for a boat to go. Okay, back to the petitions again to get this done. 1824, they petitioned the legislature. They introduced the bill, but owing to a lack of time, it was not voted on. 1825, petitioned again, and they merged it with the Great Canal Law with 17 other proposed canals. 1826, this comes in, now James Geddes comes in the picture. He was the chief engineer for the Erie Canal. He surveyed the canal all the way to end in Whitesboro, and the cost would have been $715,000. The Assembly vetoed the bill. They were worried about lawsuits diverting the water from mills that were using streams in that area. Now there was a survey by two other engineers, Owen Foreman and Nathan Roberts. 1826 in the summer, it was surveyed again by these two engineers. Now I don't know if anybody's counting, but by the time we get to the end, there would be 5 different engineer surveys and 12 proposals to get this done. Repeated. I mean, they really pushed this. The bill passed the Assembly, voted down by the Senate. 1827, Nathan Roberts surveyed just the summit level, and he made a gauging of the streams to draw upon, and calculations were made for large reservoirs coming from swamps and ponds and both branches of the Chenango River. They tried everything. Now, 1828, Roberts' survey reported ample water supply, and it cost less than $1 million. Engineer Holmes Hutchinson agreed. The Shenango would be one of the most important lateral branches of the Erie Canal. 2 reports were presented. There was a majority report, which really was not that favorable, but the minority report was, and it was adopted by the Canal Committee to show the Assembly and the Senate. It was feasible and practical. It would promote extensive coal trade from Pennsylvania, and it would allow New York to market our products to them. And their revenue would exceed the cost and interest owed. And then Benjamin Wright, chief engineer of the Erie Canal, said the valley of the Shenango River from the town of Madison presents a formation of ground most extraordinary favorable for easy excavation of a canal. So much so that I do not think the whole state of New York can present a similar continuous distance, where nature has given a formation more favorable for such a work and more easily and cheaply executed. He concluded if a canal is to be made to connect the Erie Canal with the Susquehanna, the Shenango Valley ought to be the place of location for the first work. They sure talked complicated, didn't they? Now we find out that a reservoir system would be necessary. 1829, the act authorized canal commissioners to start work if the water supply was adequate without using the 2 creeks that were in the area for 2 different watersheds. Sequoia Creek was really a Nida Creek. Cost would not exceed $1 million, and the revenue for the first 10 years would equal the amount of the cost and interest. And David Bates, an engineer, ran 3 routes from the summit, and he went 3 different endings, like Whitesboro and 2 places in Utica, and he concluded that reservoirs were necessary. 1830, the canal commissioners examined those routes personally. They visited the sources of water. They could not justify building because the cost of construction is more than $1 million. The revenue would not pay the cost. In 1831, again, the people renewed appeals to the legislature, and it was defeated by the Senate. In 1832, they renewed it again, and it was defeated by the Assembly. See how hard they tried? They just didn't give up. Then, this is what helped. In 1833, a mistake in the calculations was found in an earlier report of revenue of $34,512. Advocates of the canal had estimated it at $126,000. The difference was that coal was not included in the earlier projection. Now, didn't they say that they were connecting this to the coal mines? The Delaware and Hudson Canal has already been done, and by the way, it was by John Jervis, who is the chief engineer on this canal as well. And in 1829, it was cited as an example of bringing coal to New York City. So in 1833, legislature passed an act authorizing construction. Yay! 1833 from 1819. And this is what they built. A 97-mile long canal with all of these structures. I'm not going to read it out loud. You can see it. It's just amazing. All of this 17.5 miles of feeders alone, all dug. And still there, by the way. We're on the summit where the feeder system is still there. This is Oriskany Falls, and it's an example of multi-locks. It's at multiple locations. There's a lock down at the bottom. There's another lock, you can see the slanted doors up there, and there's a third one up there. There's a warehouse in the top right. Today it's still there, it's an apartment building. And that's Valley Road that comes down there. The left-hand building is that still there? I don't know if that's it. That used to be a tavern. I was a little girl growing up. I remember that was the Rainbow Inn. But it looks like it was used as a blacksmith shop, maybe. This is the canal in Bouthville, and it's looking north after it's crossed underneath Route 20. And that's a chicken coop on the left. It's fallen in now. This was taken in 1921. The road up on the top right is actually Canal Road. No, that's actually the towpath. That's actually a towpath. A lot of trees have grown up in between now. Never were there when they first built it. They got all the trees torn down. And this is a bridge over the Chenango Canal in Bouthville. This is what it looked like in the early 1900s. See the kids sitting up on top of the bridge. I love this photo. That's the Landmark Tavern behind it. And that little white shed, we don't know when it was put there. We know that in 1916 it was a barber shop, and there was no running water, and there's no bathroom. There was an outdoor privy down at the bottom, and probably used the water with a comb in it, water glass with a comb in it. And the landmark was made to actually be separate stores. Each side was a different store. And they had like a flour merchant, dry goods. They had a sewing person in there. They stored hops in the top. They stored molasses. It was probably one of the first mini malls. Monthly earnings. The workers, the construction workers, started at $11, and they were actually hired out. They learned from the Erie that it was better not to directly employ them, but to hire a contractor and let him get the workers. And there was as many as 500 workers in an area, and they had to live somewhere. So they usually constructed these little shanty places, like in Hamilton. They had all of Lebanon Street, I think it was full of the Irish, and they were very, very rowdy. Now, I forgot to tell you that when the man that went over to England, I can't remember his name, there was another man that went over there. Anyway, he went to find, besides the one that went to Thea Hagi, he went to find some of these workers, these Irish workers, and he found 10 qualified Irishmen that came back with him. They not only worked, they didn't only come back, they worked on the ship to get back and pay for their what is it called? Their
passage.
Yes, passage, I was trying to think of. So when they came over here, these Irish people, they needed more Irish to work with, so they made a deal with the governor to release prisoners that were, a lot of the Irish were in prison because of rowdiness and not being, they didn't have enough to eat, they couldn't find enough jobs, and they imprisoned them. And they made a deal to let them serve their sentence working on the Erie Canal, and if they did, their sentences would have been fulfilled. So when they came to the Chenango Canal, and these were the same people that had experience. Boat drivers earned $10. They were the captains. No, they were the steersmen. Boat steersman was $20. I don't know what the drivers were. Oh, they were the hoggies. That was the hoggies. They earned $10. This was a month. Boat steersmen earned $20. The boat cook $20. The boat captain anywhere from $50 to $70. Now, one thing happened in Oriskany Falls in Deansboro area, and it was a mutiny of the Irish because they were incensed that another contractor paid more down in the Binghamton area they had heard of, and they mutinied in the middle of the night. They rose up, and 300 of them marched against the America in Cassidy Hollow, which was in Oriskany Falls. They had their Irish flag waving, and they had the women there with them, and they had stones in the socks, and they would swing them around and hit with them, and they could really knock you out. And that's where that Sakatumi came from. So, but anyway, when they marched, the militia was called out against them because this was a federal offense. And so every farmer in the area that had a musket or a rifle behind the door was risen up in the night, called out there. And this one woman, Mrs. Johnson, was so upset that her sons were gone and everything. She ran to the neighbor's house and kept them up all night. And there was not a shot fired. In fact, the only thing that happened was they had to shoot a rabid dog. But the mutiny was put down because 1,000 people came out. And they couldn't believe it. The Irish said they could not believe that many people could have come out so soon. And that not a shot fired, a lot of them were imprisoned. Okay, lock information. There are a total of 116 locks. 40 locks were from Bouteville to Binghamton, and 76 locks from Bouteville to Utica. And the width of a lock was 15 feet. The width of a boat was 14 feet. So they didn't have much room to wiggle. They only could lock down or lock up one boat at a time. So they had all-out fistfights on the boats with the people that ran them. Who was going to lock through first? Because time was money, and it was seasonal. They needed to get their supply there. They would bring a loaded boat to wherever they were going. They could go all the way from Binghamton up to the Erie Canal. They could either go west to Buffalo, or they could go east to Albany. And then if they wanted to, they could go down the Hudson River. But what they would do is they would stable their horses or their mules at that point, and they would fill the water casks, and then they would tie 4 boats or more across and have 20 to 40 boats in a whole big flotilla. And a tugboat would take them down the Hudson River to the port in New York City, and then they could get their goods unloaded there. And then when they were done, they would have a whole big symphony chorus of all the captains yelling and shouting to each other, and they would push the boats back out into the harbor, and the tugboat would round them all up, and they would chug them back up to the Troy area, actually, and then they could pick up their rested horses and mules and bring them back. See, they only used mules or horses. Usually, if they were shipping something, it was a heavier load. Mules, I learned, were more sure-footed. And I didn't know this, but if anybody's a farmer here, do they know horses or mules? I don't know if anyone's here. It does. But mules' hips don't sway when they walk, so they're more sure-footed. It's sort of like women, you know, and a man, if you can figure, the man walks straighter. So the horses do. They go back and forth, you know, so they were like more prone to getting hurt. Plus, a mule, they said, was smarter. You give a mule polluted water and it won't drink it, a horse would. And so it's sick, and then they would lose their horsepower, you know. So they would use mules, and they kept the mules right on the boats. But there's a lot of stuff I have dug up, and I know that it's interesting. So I'll throw a little thing out here and there for you, and hopefully make it a little more interesting. But these locks, they were like water elevators, and they had great big King Kong doors made out of wood, and they had them made in such a way that they hit against a miter sill, and they closed at a 45-degree angle. So as the pressure of the water, if it was flat, wouldn't push through it, because they could have had a freshet or something flood, and something could have happened. So they thought of everything, and they had it measured. They used surveying tools, and the locked stones. We have a lock up on the end of our trail, right up near Salsville. And it's amazing, those stones, how they got them up there. They must have used block and tackle with oxen, and some of it's dry laid. And that is really amazing, and it fits, everything fits, it's tight, and it looks so good. We would like to restore this lock that we know of. But Holmes Hutchinson designed all these locks, and the whole thing is 90 feet long for a 75-foot boat to get into. And then the door is shut, and the water either is let in or out so that it can go down to the next level, so that it's not going down a waterfall, it's just coming to the ledge, enters the lock door shuts, elevator goes down, water's let out because of the elevator, it's going down, and then it can just go on its merry way. And that picture I showed you, Risky Falls, you see how close they were? The 3 right in a row like that. We have very hilly terrain. This is a photo of one. I think this is the one actually I was talking about. That indentation is where the doors, that if they're open, they slide all the way back from that ledge forward so that it wouldn't be jutting out because, as I said, the boats were 14 feet wide. There's another photo of it. The doors are missing, of course. And there's a different lock closer to Lance Mills. It's on Valley Road in Oriskany Falls. It's on private land, actually. You can see how they built it to swell out. It was curved out on the end. And that's so the water going upstream wasn't going to wash against the straight lock walls. It would, swell around it a little bit and slow it down. Okay, we got some boat information here. I already told you boat was 14 feet wide, 75 feet long, 65-ton maximum, but toward the later years they cheated. They made boats larger. One of the reasons I believe that the Erie Canal survived was because they enlarged it when the Chenango Canal was started. And it was able to carry larger boats that could not go down the Shenango. Some of them tried, and some of them got stuck in locks. Some of them they hurt the banks of the canal itself. They carried up to 100 tons, and they scraped along the bottom. There was all kinds of stuff that was carried. In fact, there's stuff down here. It tells you coal, hops, pig iron, and all that. My husband has a list here of something of one ship. I'll give the mic to him.
Okay, some of the things they carried on the boats, this is, I guess, taken from the Madison, which was a boat that was in the Madison, New York area, and this is what it carried in one year's time. It had 45,000 board foot of pine lumber, 5,000 oysters, 23,000 clams, quite clam bake, huh? 9,000 buffalo robes, 15,000 pitchforks, 500 passengers, so they didn't carry as many passengers as they did goods, 150 dozen tan sheepskins, 500 bags shot, I'm figuring that's probably shot for gun, 150 kegs of powder, that's probably black powder, 100,000 yards of broadcloth, and one thrashing machine they carried. Crockery, salt, sugar, coffee, rice, clothing, and dry goods. And at one time, this one also carried from Little Fort, I guess that's a location, that Captain J.D. McFarland. He arrested 4 prisoners and charged the county for bringing them before the magistrate, serving a subpoena, feeding 9 meals, and taking them to Oriskany Falls, which I guess was a prison there. It's interesting all the things they did. Now this last summer too, I learned by going down to the place in Cooperstown there, the Farmers Museum. I was talking to one of the blacksmiths there, and he was telling me they also carried iron ore from Clinton, New York, down to Norwich, which was a big hammer factory down there. And that was where the claw hammer was invented, And he says nobody's ever been able to improve on it. That claw hammer people still use today. It was invented right in the Norwich area. It's interesting all the things that developed because of this canal that came through. I also learned too, when they were first surveying and they were doing tests for water, they invented the gadget so they could find out how much annual rainfall they had. So the rain gauge was invented for the Shenango Canal. And all these things that were discoveries along the way, just like everything is found as they go on a journey to something. So there's a lot of valuable things they learned, not only just having the ability to transport goods and cargo of people, there also was a lot of inventions that came out of all this. So let me pass this back to you now.
It reminded me that Hammer Company's Madel company down in Norwich, what they did was a lot of times parts of the canal was, the water was let out so they could do repairs in the wintertime. And it was closed down, of course, for the season. So they hoped to be able to float boats from maybe April through to November or December. So they would close it down, but some parts were not. They left the water there and it would freeze over with ice. And this company that made the hammers said, okay, we're going to use our horses and our blades, and we're going to clear the ice, keep the snow off the ice, keep it clear, and they manufactured ice skating blades. And those people would skate all the way from Sugar to Norwich and back again. They had a wonderful time in that area, and it was a good, enterprising thing to do. So, this is an example of some of the boats. A bullhead boat was called that because it was a shipping boat and it had a rounded bullhead. Now, that was also stipulation for the canal. When they first made boats, everybody made boats in different ways. And they had those flat ends, those front ends, and a lot of the times the boats damaged the sides of the canal if they hit it. Some of the canal was lined with layers of clay to keep it because the soil was so porous on the sides. When they did it, they had to take, when they dug it out, they had to take horses and take these stone boats that were like a large toboggan, a very large toboggan-looking type thing, and they would load stones on it, and they would carry the stones out of where they were excavating up the sides. The sides were like at a 30-degree angle. It was a trapezoid or prism shaped. So they were trying to pack it down, but in some places the soil just would leak like crazy. In fact, when they opened the canal up in 1836, it was in October, and in some places it leaked into people's basements that were located so close to it, and they complained, and of course, they had to close it down again, let the water out, fix it with clay that was found locally, just like the hydraulic cement. And they reopened in March of the next year. That's why there's sort of, sometimes you see 2 different years where it opened up, 1836 or 1837. But these boats, the bullhead is the rounded boat. The packet boat is the one where it has a lot of little windows in it, and they carry passengers. In fact, I got a replica one that somebody made. It's over 50 years old, so I know it didn't float on the Chenango. But the Slyke closed in 1878. This guy wasn't around then. If you want, you could pass that around. Just watch the ladder goes off. Nothing big deal, just don't lose it. And Lakers were boats that could go up the Erie and then go, they were larger, and they would go on to the Erie, they would go on to the big Great Lakes. It was a large boat that was very, very watertight, and and a lot of times, sometimes people could ride on a boat that had cargo in it, but sometimes they found out they were down in the hold with the cargo. And you don't want to be down there with goats and pigs and stuff like that, so they shipped all kinds of things on this stuff. But they were the people that couldn't afford the regular rate on the packet boat. And on the packet boat, you know, another thing is, you see on that one of the windows on the top, there's a place where they could sit. And you heard the term low bridge everybody down. You heard the song. Well, that was because when people were sitting up there, the bridge only had a clearance of 12 inches. And those people had to scramble down quick when the horn blew from the captain. And he yelled, low bridge, and everybody down. So they had to hurry to get down there, or they were going to be knocked off into the drink. Another important thing that happened is down in Norwich, the Civil War had happened, and there were soldiers that were shipped on the Chenango Canal. There was a flotilla of 10 boats with 100 soldiers on each boat. So 1,000 shipped out, and I was given 2 figures in 2 different references, but I believe that 456 of them came back. So this was down in Binghamton. This is a painting that hangs in the Shenango Valley County Museum. Now, a lot of people didn't know this, but Mott started in Beltville. When we started doing some research on local businesses, we found out that the feed mill, which is still there today, is one of the mills that was used by Mott's originally in 1868. Samuel R. Mott came. His grandfather had taught him how to have trained horses to walk in a circle around these 2 big stones that ground the pulp, the apples into a pulp. And it would be, a trench was around it, and the juice was collected, and he found a way that was patented almost. I mean, he could have patented this. He found a certain sand out of New England area could filter through the juice and take all the impurities out, and it wouldn't go too far if you didn't want it to go too far. Now, they didn't know about apple juice back then. What they did was they made apple cider vinegar, and that was really important because there wasn't any refrigeration, and they used it for preservation. And especially, you know, when you got in situations like you were a boater and you lived on the boat from April to November, the only time you got fresh meat was when the boat started, because they didn't stop at towns and stay overnight. I mean, they were living on the boats, and they moved, and they got as much stuff shipped as possible to make money in about half a year. So they had to pickle it, or they had to dry it, or they had to salt it. So the apple cider vinegars were what helped keep things that they could eat. And here's a photo in Boutville of a building that's no longer there. And it was on the other side of the canal from where I don't know if anybody knows where the Boutville Mill is, if you've ever been up there. That was across from it. And that's where they originally started, and then they moved into the Boutville Mill second. And that was, this building unfortunately burned down. I call it our courier knives photo. Just love it. There's horses in the wagon, and obviously it's taken in the winter in the snow. So, and the canal probably wasn't, I think we figured this could have been late 1800s even, because there's a bridge across the canal, and that wouldn't have been there with ships going down it, or boats. So we know that that's a later picture after it's closed in 1878. And this is a picture of some of the workers. Sorry it's so grainy, that's the way the photo was. And he's holding a big bottle. They made apple cider champagne until Prohibition hit. So I don't know what that tasted like. In fact, we could have tasted it because we have a small bottle of that somebody gave us. It's got the cider, or it's got the champagne in it too. Never been opened. And this is a bridge that somebody constructed because the canal separated. A lot of farms got their land separated, and they had a lot of farm bridges and stuff. And this was a footpath that Jenny Fairchild was walking on. And I was talking about this at the Limestone Ridge Historical Society in Oriskany Falls one day, and Mr. Fairchild was there, and he says, that has to be my aunt, or my great aunt. So it's amazing what you find sometimes. So, as a financial data, the Chenango Canal for the state of New York did not do well. They estimated it at $992,000. They had $1 million appropriated, cost $2.5 million. Total revenues collected was $744,000. And it's not the only thing though. What the Chenango Canal did was it opened up our area. It opened up this southern tier. We didn't have what the rest of New York State had. We were not really part of the Empire State. We were the pioneers, still struggling to get water from the stream. And they had coal stoves heating the whole house up by the Erie Canal and in New York City. So we wanted the same, and people clamored. I mean, they really, really fought to get this canal. You saw how many times they had to petition. And this did open up the coal, because coal was an experiment. There's a whole big story about that too. Just two brothers that found anthracite coal in Pennsylvania. They were used to the other kind of coal, which is called what?
Bituminous.
What is it? Bituminous. And that was what was in England that was being shipped. And when they had the wars, one of them in the War of 1812, they stopped all shipment. And so they needed to find something. And this man that was walking around the mountains in Pennsylvania found these black stones. And he dug a little bit and found more. And he decided to buy all this land. People called him crazy. And he walked and walked and walked, and he discovered all this, and he decided, he and his brother together, that they were going to sell this as a fuel. And so they tried burning it, and it was very hard to catch on fire. And they had a whole big raft of it to take to New York City to try to sell to investors. And the raft tipped over and dumped. And then they tried other methods of getting it there, and there was just no way to do it except by water. So they had to build a canal. And that was the Delaware Hudson Canal, and they had to build a railroad as well. And that was the first time that a railroad engine was brought to America. And it was made to the specifications of John Jervis, who was the chief engineer for the Shenango Canal. So he was the chief engineer for the Delaware and Hudson as well. So by 1829, they had that going, and what they did was they have a, I don't know if you've ever been in Pennsylvania, you've seen Moose Mountain. It looks like a misspelling, but it's a very high mountain where there is coal, and when they had the train engine shipped over here from England, they found it was too heavy for them to use to bring the cars up the mountains. So they put it stationary down at the bottom and ran it to push the cars up in some way. I don't know how they did that, but they got the tracks up to the top of this mountain, and they had to keep it at a standard 4 to 5 miles an hour. So they didn't want it running rampant down the other side. So he constructed a series of sails on the back of it. It must have looked like crazy. They must have thought John Jervis, but you know what we think? He thought out of the box. He was able to slow that down with a series of connecting that to the wheels and the brakes and everything, and keep an even 4 to 5 miles going down. So they got coal to New York City across the Hudson River. And so because they had all these advantages, coal stoves and window panes and nice homes that you could use all winter around. You didn't have to shut the rooms down and just heat with a fireplace with wood that you had to go out and chop. That was the main thing they wanted the canal for. And then another main thing that happened, the hop business. One man, let's see, James Coolidge, yes, thank you. James Coolidge, and this is terrible because I'm the historian, but he started by growing hops from New England on his family farm in Bouckville. And it was on Route 12B, actually, if you want a route number. It was the first house on the before the intersection to Route 20 on the left. And he experimented for years, and he finally got hop vines to grow. And his friend decided to take some down to New York City and sell them, and he made $1,000 on his first sale. So all the farmers got on the bandwagon then. And then Waterville became a big center of establishing the pricing of hops for the world. Waterville was not too far away from there. That's still central New York. And so we ended up with between 4 different counties, including Madison County and, what county are we in here? Onondaga? They weren't one of them. It was 4 different centralized counties. They actually supplied 80% of the country's hops. And of course, hops are used for beer. And hops and beer were big, big, big things to ship on the Shenango Canal. So it was really funny. In fact, I have a funny story about that in the back. I got to read this to you just quickly. How are you doing? All right. That's okay. That's okay. All right. This happened because when they transported beer, they tried to do it at night because during the day it would heat up the casks and it would pop the corks. And they didn't want that to happen. They didn't want to lose any beer. That's their product they're selling. So they did it at night, and if they would sometimes bribe the lock tender who did the locks to let them go through first, because remember we were saying how time is money. But what happened was there was a company in Oriskany Falls. They didn't want them to go up without getting through the lock without getting a cask of it. So they held them up, and before you know it, it was getting to be the dawn, and then they held them up another half hour, and the sun was up higher. And so this happened from a man that was there on the boat, Sidney Putnam. Okay, here's how they talk. I heard a sizzling, and I says, Sid, golly, look out, the beer's a sizzling. And old Sid says, let her sizzle. And he hadn't no more than got the words out before bang, 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 and 3 plugs, they shot up about 30 foot, and the beer followed and kept a-spouting as though they'd been an air pump in every barrel. Sid, he come a-running, and he says, golly, boys, hold her in, darn it, hold her in. And he put his hand over the hole in one barrel to keep back the beer, but you should have seen it spurt between his fingers and into his eyes and nose and mouth, faster than he could wink or swaller, and he could not say a dumb word, but just cough and blow. And I run to the bow of the boat and says to Windy Wilson, golly, Windy, whip up and get to town, or we will be riding in beer instead of water. And then how Windy did lace them mules. I never see no steamboat go like we went down the old Chenango, throwing the swell clear up out onto the towpath, and the sun kept a-shining, and the plugs a-banging, and the beer spouting like a lantern-lit whale. I can't believe it. This is so fun. So, when you turn up little gems like that, it really makes it fun to look through. Here's another lock. They're dismantling it. This was in Oriskany Falls, and there's men on the right-hand side, and to the right of the men, you can see the railroad tracks. And that's the biggest thing, I think, that put the Chenango Canal out of business. It was faster transportation at a cheaper rate. Water's still used today, like the barge canal is still in business, and the Chenango is not. And another one, you can see all the loose pieces of logs.
It's the same lots we were looking at earlier.
Yes, it is. It's the same locks. There's a lock in the back still intact. See, and there's 3 of them there. So somebody that gave this to me told me the names of the people, and I have those written down. When they built this, it was just so impressive of what they did. I mean, they had people that they felled a tree and they would saw it in plank lengths, and then they would take the bark off of it. And when they did the towpath, after they dug out with all kinds of spades and digging apparatus, and they dug out what they had to do for the prism, and they shaped the sides, they threw the soil up on the banks, and then they had to make the towpath firm. So they took the bark of the tree and the branches off the tree. They chopped it right off, and they mixed the branches crisscross on the towpath, and then they threw more dirt on that, and they mixed the bark they took off the tree with that to reinforce it. And then they tamped it down with the animals that walked on it, and all the wheelbarrows across it, and it was like 500 men that all knew their jobs, and all did what they had to do. And they would work 14 hours a day to 24 hours a day if they had to get that done. And they worked against the weather. They were out in all kinds of weather. Sometimes they not only had shanties so that if they were out too far and they couldn't get back, they had to sleep out there. And they would make like these little huts out of, they would fell a tree, and they would roll it up to another tree that was felled 4 feet away. So there was one tree parallel to another. And they took all the branches off of them, and they laid the branches down, the softer ones down on the ground, along with the bark first, and the branches. And then they would skin bark off trees, and they would get inside of it. They would wrap the bark right around them. And the branches of the trees went from one log to the other, right over in the middle of the curved roof. And then they put bark on top of that, and that's what they had to sleep in. And it was, it was primitive, but they did what they had to do. And like I said, they found out about the hydraulic cement, and they found stone in certain areas, and quarries developed, and they even chipped stone. If it was too late in the winter, they would let it freeze. They would drip water, or they would build a fire on a ledge and get the stone hot, and then they would let the water drip into the cracks that were made and let it freeze to let the stone get off, and they would hammer it down and the stone would fall. And it's just amazing. And then like this, Fran, you can explain about this on the door.
Okay, the locks had gates on them. And this here was found at one of the locks, was it Madison School, was it? One of the kids that were helping us found this, and we brought it in. This was part of the structure of the doors on those locks that they had. And it looks like it was all forged, hammer forged metal. And this is how they constructed. So this is an actual artifact of one of the Canal locks. I think it was 76. Yeah, just pass it around. Get an idea of the weight of it. So they, when I went down to the Farmers Museum, the guy who was forging out stuff down there explained to me what they did is they took iron ore, they would heat it up, and what would melt off was metal. If you ever go down to the Farmers Museum, you can actually watch them make nails and all kinds of things in the iron ore they have down there. It's very interesting. I think the guy I was talking to down there, he was looking like a blacksmith, but I think he had a PhD. Very knowledgeable guy, very well educated. So, yes, thank you.
Well, that's the end of my slideshow, and I have something else maybe Chuck could set up now. While I'm talking, I don't know if you want me to just plug this in and try it, or it's a little DVD. You might want to. What happened was, we moved back to Belleville just a few years ago, 12 years ago, and I never knew that was a canal there. And I got involved with it because I was looking for something to give back to the community. I had gotten very sick in the hospital, and I ended up staying there for 6 days, and I got kind of desperate, and I was in a lot of pain, and I made a deal with God, and I said, you get me out of this, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I said, you just let me know, you gotta hit me over the head, I gotta know it when I see it. Well, I tried several things that I didn't really feel it was right. We worked with the school a little bit. We had a book business at the time, and we tried showing books and things, and they had a group of students that were older read books to younger, so we gave away a lot of books. I tried giving Bibles to the hospital that I was in. Then I saw that water one day. My little grandchildren, 7-year-old David was with me. We went for a walk to feed the ducks on the water, and he ran ahead, and he found a stairway that was built down the ravine. See, up on the summit, they had to build the canal prism as low as possible so that the higher lakes and reservoir system that was made could gravity feed down to it. You saw there was like 17.5 miles of feeders and from 7 different reservoirs that were built. And so I didn't know about all this stuff, and I saw the stairway, I thought somebody went through a lot of trouble. So we went through brambles and everything. It was all overgrown like a secret garden or something. And we go down there, and there's a little 6-inch pathway, and there's all these weeds and burdocks. And so I thought, this is straight, and that water's straight. That's odd. Well, that was Sunday. On Monday, I opened up the paper, and there was a request to plant wildflowers on Route 20 in the town of Madison, and I was within that area. And I thought, I'll try that. So I called the number, and the lady that was talking to me was Emily Marshall, and she told me that she recognized the waters of the Chenango Canal, and she was the past secretary of the Chenango Canal Association, and that was in 1994. Well, this was the year 2001. So I thought, wow, I'm interested in that. So she hooked me up with Dot Wilsey, who had binders and binders full of stuff about canals. She had gone to all these meetings about the Erie Canal Heritage Corridor, and how New York State Canal System was supposed to get all this money from the state and the federal government, but they never included the Shenango Canal because it ended by dropping into a Oriskany Creek. The aqueduct had fallen in, it was taken away. Oops. Can we stop this a second? How do you stop it? Oh, it started automatically. It doesn't do that on my computer. That's really cool. Anyway, okay, thanks. Okay, so where was I? Okay. I think you went backwards. Anyway, I got interested in the canal. The more I found out about it, the more I wanted to do something for the community. And I thought it would be more of a boost in revenue. I thought people that could boat on it, and fishermen that could come, etc., and people that wanted to walk the trail. We ended up, a whole lot of people came forward, and they just helped me. We developed an organization. I'm going through the fast abbreviated story here. And we are now 10 years old, 2011, and we're fully volunteer, and we have created a 5-mile trail, hand-hewn just like they did back then. A lot of trees were felled, a lot of brush moved, and some of it on our hands and knees. And a lot of these people were in their 60s and 70s. And there wasn't a lot of people to do it at a time. We didn't have 500 men, but it took a couple of years, and we got it all the way from a beautiful waterfall, where it falls into Oriskany Creek, where one of the aqueducts was removed. So the more I learned about it, the more I'm more interested in the history of it, and we're promoting it as part of a heritage corridor. We never did get the money from the state or federal governments because it's not considered part of their, it doesn't, it's just not one of it. But it is a New York State canal, and we pay a permit to work on it to New York State Canal Authority. And recently, a group of fishermen that are fly fishermen approached me from Albany, and they want to actually cut fishing paths down to the canal down the bank. It's in that ravine in our area, so if they could do that, they could get down to the water and then cast with their fly fishing. So we're working on doing that. We're also working possibly on getting a bridge to go over the Oriskany Creek. And right now, that little building that you saw, it belongs to us now, but the basement is falling in. We use it as a display house for reprints of old pictures of the area, the canal and everything, some of the ones that you saw. And the basement's completely, I mean, it was built in 2 different times, eras. It was probably from early 1900s. We have to redo the whole thing. So we got a grant from the Mid-York Foundation. And now we're getting more bids and finding out ways. We're probably going to have to lift the building up to save it and just work on the foundation and then put the building back on it. And that's also dealing with NISAC because they have a big, huge utility pole 3 feet away from the front wall. And it's been there since the 1940s. So we're dealing with that, and we're dealing with permits and, and all that stuff. So, this is part-time. This is volunteer. And I have some very good-hearted people still now in their 70s and 80s helping me. And we got some new people, and we're always looking for more people. And so we decided to have an intern that from Colgate University's Upstate Institute. I wrote a grant to get an intern for the summer, and he did this little DVD, and this is what I'll end it with. And if you have any questions later, I know I probably didn't cover a lot of things that, if you have questions, maybe I'll know the answer. So I'll encourage you to stay by. I know they probably have refreshments or something. So we'll let you go ahead and start it.
I have one question. Do you know what the fare was from Utica to Binghamton for an individual to go on the boat?
I can look it up in this book right here. I don't have that memorized, but I've got Michelle McPhee's limestone blocks and overgrowth, and a lot of that stuff's in there. And I would encourage anybody to borrow that from the library or actually get your own copy because it's really interesting if you like history.
I might have it in here. I'll look.
Okay, thank you.
A little north of Oakville. A little north of Oakville.
Information of the canal, surrounding waters and land, while maintaining it as both an historic and public recreation site.
This endeavor is to help invite you as a participant, as a donor, as a member of the Shenango Canal Association, so you can see that we're here to take care of and maintain a historic treasure, a 5-mile-long Shenango Canal. It's 173 years old, and we are the stewards, so to speak, of the towpath trail. It's 12 foot wide, northwest, and along the summit, which is the peak of 1,150 feet of the original 96-foot, 96-mile-long canal.
The Chenango Canal was completed in 1836 after 2 years of construction, and it was called the best built canal in the state. The Shenango Canal was built to connect the Erie Canal in Utica with the coal mines in Pennsylvania and Binghamton. A panorama like this one in the Hamilton Public Library depicts the scene in a typical small town along the Shenango Canal. The Shenango Canal is 42 feet wide at the top and 26 feet wide at the bottom, an average 4 feet deep. Canal boats like this were typically built 14 feet wide and between 70 and 90 feet long. They were propelled along the canal by teams of mules or horses that walked along a 12-foot wide towpath trail along tow lines of 70 and 90 feet long.
None of the water that we obtained from the Oriskany Creek all had to come from the previous system, which had to be constructed after the summit left.
Those meters still keep the canal at the summit filled with water to this day.
It was found with the construction of reservoirs that sufficient water could be obtained, and that this was verified permission to construct the canal site again.
trail must have transported 1,000 Civil War soldiers of the 114th Regiment northwest to Utica in 10 wagon loads. Each town they passed through met them with much fanfare and patriotic flag waving. Among various companies getting their start in the canal is Mott's apple cider and vinegar.
Well, this was Mott's apple cider in 1863 originally, and demonstrated the feed mill in 1934.
That same barn used for Mott's apple cider and vinegar is still existing today in Bowville, New York. That barn sits next to what is now the Chenango Canal Cottage Museum on the corner of Route 20 and Canal Road. Canal Museum was originally built as a barber shop. This is Butch Shattuck, Bowville's barber. Butch's grandfather started barbering in the Canal Museum in 1910. Butch is now barbering across the street, keeping the family business alive. Today, the Canal Museum is used to display historic pictures and artifacts from the canal.
This iron piece was found at one of the locks, it's lot number 68, and it was a hand-forged piece of metal that held the big King Kong doors together that were in the lock. And this was preserved in the lot, and one of our board members dug it up, preserved it, and hung it here to show how things were done to hold together those big doors on the locks.
This section of the trail, about a mile and a half, was built by the village of Hamilton as a result of cooperative effort between the Canal Association and South Madison Heritage Trust. So, what this path follows is the towpath along the Shenango Canal. And this section of the path leads up to the airport and beyond, heading towards Woodlands Pond, which is about 3 miles.
The longest existing stretch of the canal, the 5-mile stretch around the summit of Bowville that ends in the water gums in the Whiskey. Today, there exists a trail that is being maintained by the Chenango Canal Association that lies in the old towpath trail that follows the Chenango Canal. This trail runs from Hamilton, New York, almost all the way to Syracuse. The total distance is approximately 7. The towpath trail requires an enormous amount of work to maintain it at 12 feet wide for 7 miles. Outside groups often come in to help with the maintenance of the trail. These groups include BOCES, Hamilton College, Morrisville College, and Colgate University. With their help and more, the trail can be as wide as it's supposed to be. Helping keep the trail clear is the town of Madison, who bush hogs the trail. To this day, along the towpath trail, it is possible to see wildlife in their natural habitat, which includes year-round trout fishing along the canal. The best spot to fish is on the handicap-accessible observation deck next to the canal.
Kindly hand-erected by New York State. Designated with the Shenango Canal across 20 in Bowville. National and State Register for Historic Places.
The Chenango Canal Association Board meets the second Tuesday of every month.
Across the shadows of the clouds. Well, we first got involved with the Chenango Canal Association because they applied to the Parks and Rec New York for technical assistance. It was stating that the towpath trail was already in place. And really, I think that the big thing that got our attention was that Diane had this vision of a longer trail all the way to the old Shenango Canal. There's still so many things I want to say to you. Just go on. Just go on. Really enjoy our bike ride from Hamilton here to Knoxville. We came along the old Shenango Canal, and it's really very, very nice. It's, I guess, the only area of the canal where there's still standing water, and it goes through some very open space, beautiful wetlands, and a great place to see some birds. We saw these wonderful big blue herring along the way, and very much enjoyed our ride. Looking forward to going on up to Souls Mountain.
At the trail entrances, kiosks like this one can be found. Also, along the trail, 5 interpretive signs can be found pointing out areas of interest.
So I hope you enjoyed our meeting. I thank Upstate Institute for this and all the volunteers that helped in participating in the film. We do need you folks. We had a lot of help already. People that found things in their bedrooms and donated to us. People that wrote books. Rose Weldon from Sugar, town historian, wrote this book. Bob Bass that wrote a book about our feeder system. It's a phenomenal experimental thing that's still working. It's such a gem to have this here in our community. We hope you join us. Please contact us.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Diane. We've got some great refreshments over here, folks, so stay around, talk to some people, ask some questions, enjoy the refreshments.
Hi, this book, feel free to look through it when we're here. Passengers in 1852 were 4 cents a mile. So just under 100 miles, so $4. $4. And it also has the rates for butter, cheese, wood, blah, blah, blah. Thank you. It's pretty interesting stuff.